What's going on, my friend? It's Danny, and today I'm going to talk about how we can burn fat while we sleep. So first of all, quick disclaimer, don't take the content of this video as medical advice. It's for information purposes only. So first of all, why do we want to burn fats? Well, I think the obvious reason is that it's important to help us to prevent obesity or being overweight. Or if we're already obese, then it's even more important to burn off this excess fat and maintain a healthy weight. Now, obesity has been shown to increase the risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease, but it's also been shown to double the risk of many forms of cancer and also neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. And studies have also shown that being obese is associated to taking 6 years off the lifespan. And in cases of extreme morbid obesity, it's as much as 14 years. So it's really important that we burn off any excess fat, maintain a healthy weight. And if we do that, not only do we look better and feel better, but we'll also reduce our risk of many of these diseases, which is good. Now, the bad thing is that most of us actually associate pain to losing weight or burning fat. We picture hours of grinding away on the treadmill, eating salad all day, which isn't really appealing. Now, the good news is it doesn't have to be that bad. There is a superpower that we all have, but not many of us have used before. And that is a metabolic switch in the body, which allows us to burn fat 24/7 all the time, even when we sleep. And when we activate this switch in the body, we shift to a metabolic state, which is said to be called ketosis. So how do we activate this magic switch in the body? Well, first of all, we need to take a look at the food that we eat as fuel. So there's two main fuel sources or food sources that we use as fuel, and these are called macronutrients. Now, the two main ones are sugar or fat, and the body can burn both of these as fuel, but it can also store both of these as fuel as well. Now, in the case of sugar, we actually store that in the liver and our muscle cells in the form of glycogen, but we can only store it in very finite amounts, in small amounts. Now, fat, on the other hand, we can store that in the cells in the body in pretty much unlimited amounts, and that's why we get fat and get overweight, basically. So it's really important to understand that if we have sugar stored in our liver, our bodies will always use that fuel source over fat. It's only when we burn off the sugar in our liver that we really start to burn fat in a significant way. So I'll give you a good analogy for this. So imagine you've just bought a hybrid car, and this car you can either run in petrol mode or you can run in electric mode. Now imagine that you can only use electric mode once you've run out of petrol, basically. So the electric is like a backup mode. Now if that's the case and we constantly top up the petrol and we never let the tank get to empty, we'll never be able to flip to this electric mode. And that's what the majority of the population is doing when it comes to sugar, in that we never actually deplete the sugar in our livers because we're always topping it up with food that is rich in sugar and carbohydrates is just broken down to sugar, basically. So that's what's actually happening. Now, in the West, we eat a lot. We eat 3 meals a day, we snack between meals, and we're pretty much eating right to the point when we go to bed. So it's a lot of food. Now, our human genome or biological blueprint just hasn't evolved to be eating this much food. Now, our ancestors, on the other hand, they just didn't have access to food like we do today. And they would go through periods of feasting or famine. And during these periods of famine, it was quite common for them to go days, weeks, or even months without food. And obviously when that happened, they would quickly burn off their sugar reserves in the liver and they would flip to fat burning mode of ketosis. So we've actually evolved to burn fat as our primary fuel source, and that's a completely natural state. But most of us have never used it. In fact, most of us have never gone a single day of our lives without food. So how do we do this? How do we get into this ketosis and burn fat 24/7 even while we're sleeping? Well, I've already mentioned that first of all we need to burn off the sugar that's in our livers, and once we do that we flip to the fat burning mode. But how do we really do that? Well, what we need to do is change our diet, and the diet that we want to follow is something called the ketogenic diet. And a ketogenic diet isn't about calorie restriction, it's about changing the ratio of our nutrients. So a ketogenic diet will stipulate an ideal ratio of proteins, carbs and fats, which are our main macronutrients, to allow us to get into ketosis and also stay in ketosis. And a ketogenic diet is very low in carbohydrates, it has moderate protein, and it has high fat. Now, if you've never heard of this diet before, I know it can be difficult to get your head around the idea that to burn fat we need to eat lots of fat, but it really works. And I also know that fat has been demonized over the years to be bad, but fat is actually completely healthy and safe and we need it. And as long as you stay away from trans fats are the unhealthy fats, then you'll be fine. So the ketogenic diet is low in carbs, moderate in protein and high in fat. But what are the actual ratios? Well, the ratios will vary slightly from everyone, so everyone's slightly different and we have a different metabolism. But the general rule of thumb is 65% fat, about 35% protein and 5% carbs. So 65% fat, 35% protein and 5% carbs. Now, when you're calculating the carbs or the carbohydrates, you don't have to count fiber. So although fiber is technically a carbohydrate, it will not spike your blood sugar. So it won't kick you out of ketosis. So fiber is absolutely fine. So those are the ratios. So if we stick to those ratios, we'll eventually get into ketosis and we'll start burning fat 24/7 basically. Now, the only problem is it can take quite a long time to get into ketosis just following the ketogenic diet. It can take weeks or even months for some people. And compliance can be difficult as well. So if we're tempted to cheat and we have a big bowl of ice cream, obviously our blood sugar will skyrocket and we'll be kicked out of ketosis and we'll have to start again. But the good news is, if we stay in ketosis for a while, our sugar cravings eventually just disappear altogether, and that makes sticking to the diet much easier. Now, if you don't fancy waiting around for weeks or months to get into ketosis and you want to fast track it, you can do. So remember, to get into ketosis, first of all, we need to burn off our sugar reserves in the liver. And the easiest way to actually do that is just to not eat anything. So if you do a 24-hour to 48-hour water fast, and then you'll flip into ketosis, basically, you burn off the sugar reserves, and then you just maintain it with the ketogenic diet, basically. So that is a diet itself, but how do we know if it's working? How do we actually know if we're in ketosis? Well, there's several ways, but the easiest and cheapest way that I use is using these ketone strips, which you can buy on Amazon or in the chemist, and they're quite inexpensive, they're pretty cheap. So that is what a strip actually looks like, if you can see that. And that's the bottle, and it gives you a chart of colours basically. So what these strips do is they actually detect something called ketone bodies, and ketone bodies are the things our bodies will produce from the fat when we're in ketosis, and the ketone bodies are the real fuel source that we're using to survive basically. So if we just pee on the strip, what will happen is, if you have ketone bodies in your urine, they will actually react with the strip and cause it to change colour. So if the strip changes colour, then you know you're in ketosis because you're producing these ketone bodies in the blood and urine basically. So that's how it works. So that's basically the video. I've given you a very broad general overview. Now, if you would like to try this, I do implore you to do a bit more research and speak to a professional as well before you get started. So most people are fine with ketosis, but some people can struggle with it. So I do recommend you take this seriously and do some more research if you want to try it out. So let me just recap the video and then I'll wrap it all up. So how do we burn fat even when we're sleeping? Well, what we need to do is get into this fat burning mode called ketosis, and we do that by first burning off the sugar reserves in our liver, and then we can flip to the fat burning mode. And how do we do that? Well, what we need to do is follow a ketogenic diet and shift our ratio of nutrients. So the ketogenic diet will have low carbs, about 5%, it will have moderate protein, about 35%, and it will have high fat, about 65%. And remember, when you're counting your carbs, you don't have to count fiber. So once we do that, we'll go into ketosis and we'll start burning fat all the time. But how do we know if it's working? Well, we can use ketone strips, which you can purchase on Amazon or the chemist, and they're quite cheap as well. And if you peel on the strip and it changes color, it means you've got ketone bodies in your urine, and the ketone bodies are the things our bodies produce when we're in ketosis as our primary fuel source. So that is it. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit the like button, and if you'd like to see more videos like this one, please hit the subscribe button. And until the next time, please take care.